have to say, if there's one takeaway I have from tonight is that if all of us could answer all of the brilliant questions that the expert panel posed to this group, oh my goodness, we would be changing the world right away.
Great. So before we have, Priscilla and I have the fortune of doing the very tricky job of trying to wrap what has been, I think, a very deep and rich collection of thoughts and ideas this evening, I would like to give you a few ideas on the logistics for the evening. The ISC team, as always, is constantly innovating, and I want you to know that unlike other years, please do not leave campus. The festivities this evening are coming here. They start here in approximately 5 minutes. If you go twaddling down off into town, you're not going to find what you're looking for. The second thing is that while the drinking begins very shortly, the thinking also continues. The ISC have continued with some content this evening, which is a great idea. And in particular, we welcome you back right here into the auditorium for a very special event. 9:15, Nina Dos Santos is doing a very relaxed and personal conversation with CEO of Credit Suisse, Tidjam Thiam. I think it'll be very exciting. It's not so much the flavor of the finance industry or macroeconomic outlook. It's more a side issue that hasn't really been touched upon yet in our discussions, and that is a very strong, and I think is also a very complementary issue, and that, of course, is personal growth. So please bring your beer, bring your wine, come join us at 9:15 here. Okay, Priscilla. Thanks. Claps for the logistics. That's nice. That's the
by things done here.
Yeah. Okay, so now wrap up. Wow. We put forward a question for you, a request of you all this morning to step up to the table to contribute, to raise your voices, and I think we are not disappointed at all. So I think the first thing we need to acknowledge, and Marcella helped me with this earlier this afternoon, is that the problem or the issue of growth is not an easy question, and simple answers are not welcome on this stage. So with that, we are asking this evening the 5 key questions of growth that we've seen from the discussions this entire day. First is the what, there is the how, there is the where, there is the when, and there is the why. Starting with the what. What is growth? I think with the number of references to sustainability and inequality that we've heard so far from Professor Jackson, from Doris Leuthard, Sashin Pilot, I think it's fair to say that we found that the definition and conceptualization of growth in itself is definitely expanding, and that we are reaching a consensus that growth is necessary, but it is not sufficient. So as Colin mentioned just before, we can see that expansion come through the SDGs, also through COP21 and the financing for development in Addis earlier this year or last year. And I think from the discussions, we can kind of see that there is a growing consensus for a shift from short-term to a more long-term perspective, whether that's looking at the jobs in the future, whether that's looking at unleashing potential, unleashing a potential as a different approach to policy making, or with those established industries trying to work out where the new source of business growth is.
Then there's the how, and I think that the expert panel did half of my job on that point, because they asked a lot of questions that I was going to ask, right? Which is this notion, first and foremost, that we think about, the fact that growth is not an absolute concept, in the sense that if you think about just the term growth, intrinsically, it's neither good nor bad. It depends on what is growing and for what purpose, right? So growth can be responsible, sustainable, equitable. It can also mean resource depletion and inequality and division and instability, right?
Yeah.
Growth is really about choice. It's about choice of both the outcomes that we want to see achieved with that growth, and that brings us back to something that many speakers brought about, and that now this final panel also discussed, which is the notion of what is the measure of success? How do we define that growth? And that is really going to take us to that important point of actually realizing that in order to get to a particular outcome, we need to know what that outcome is. So I think that as we move together in our discussion, making sure that we are asking ourselves these tough questions. What is the ultimate outcome that we were trying to encounter? And how can we then, based on the constraints of knowing, okay, here are some of the forces that we are operating under, right? So we do have economic imperatives and this push to from different sectors or from different actors to achieve their objectives. But within that box, once I understand what my limitations are and once I understand what the outcomes, if we think back to the exhortation that we had today to try to have it all, right? What are the creative answers that we might come up with? And how can those be achieved? And so this notion of choice is crucial because at the end of the day, it will be up to us to really exercise it.
The where, I think also from the discussions today, we can see that growth is happening of its own accord or not happening, but it's happening differently in different contexts. In the developing world versus the developed world, that's important in distinction. It's happening differently in different industries and in different areas. I think an issue that hasn't come up so far is also the divide between rural and urban. And also, of course, from the interesting question from the floor earlier today from the Indian gentleman, growth is not just a Western idea, and it should not be assessed only by Western notions of success. Which also reminds me of a Leader of Tomorrow's essay submission for the competition, who wasn't on stage, and that was Sinjin Ojulo, who really put forward the case that growth is experienced at the local level, and therefore local meanings and understandings of growth should also be incorporated and not just stay too high in the macro.
Oh, great. And then there's the when, right? So if we start from this assumption that growth is a matter of also choice and that we have to define this debate, when is it that we're going to choose, right? If we establish that not all growth is created equal and that all growth comes at a cost, whether it be resource depletion or investment, which can be private or government, as we've heard from many speakers today, right? If those things are constant, and if they're always going to be hindrances or constraints that we're going to operate under, when is it that we take action? Do we wait for the world to fall apart? Do we wait for instability to rise or for all of the resources to be depleted? Or can we really take that leader step to move ahead and say, you know, maybe we are spending a lot of time describing how things are rather than imagining how we want them to be and how we can actually bring them to fruition. And I think that one of the things that I've always found inspiring about coming to this conference is that I get to go back and say that I'm a leader. And it wasn't because I said it, right? It was because you said it. You told me leaders of tomorrow, and you told me leaders of today. And that is pretty empowering, right? I get to go home and go, yeah, I can do this. You know, all these people say I'm a leader of tomorrow. And I'm looking at all of you to feel the same way, right? If we don't do it, who will? If we don't set that agenda, who will? If the people in this room can come to an agreement about what are the outcomes that we really want to see happen, nobody else out there is going to be able to.
Exactly, and I think that brings us to the why, the final why. Now, I think this is the underwriting topic among every discussion here. It was brought up well on stage just before. Chan Chun Sing put it very eloquently today that societies do not flourish with economic growth alone. Societies suffer when the poor are unable to see a path forward for betterment. As Lord Griffiths so wonderfully touched upon today, growth should be considered a deeply human issue. He quoted Aristotle about flourishing. I'm going to quote him back. Aristotle also said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." With that, I ask you to go drink, but think, come back tomorrow. We're going to take this debate the next step forward, and I ask you with two questions to end this. What is the problem we are facing? And are the answers that we're coming up with, are they good enough?
There's a surprise.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world-famous Moonmanchans, the Swiss-Mark theatre troupe that has pioneered a new form of visual theatre and has inspired generations of showgoers across 5 continents over 4 decades. Please give them a big hand for their exclusive appearance. For their exclusive appearance at the 46th St. Gallen Symposium.